Yat A. Michaela Shirley and Chef Twabashli to Twitter Genie Bashashin, as she had Dashache, my A Dashkirni Dashanella, Kindle Cheat Date Nasha. Hello, my name is Michaela Shirley, and I am originally from a small community in Kindle Arizona, which is located in northeastern Arizona. I am going to present very quickly a map that I had created for my master's thesis project when I was a graduate student in the Community and Regional Planning program. During that time, I had to ask myself a very broad question, what was the role of schools in the development of my community of Kindle. And the reason why I, you know, had to ask myself that question is because one of my nephews at the time was going to one of the local schools there, and he had this experience by one of his Navajo teachers where he was being called an MR, a mental retard, for any time that he had questions or maybe wasn't sure about the subject matter. And so that really upset me because we have an opportunity now to teach our own children. And it made me think about how schools then have become an undervalued asset in our community. And so I really wanted to explore then, like, how did the school shape our landscape today in Kilichi? And that, it has a much more broader impact to beyond just educating our children. It actually brings infrastructure. And so that's the story I want to share with you today. So we'll begin first with the place that gives my community its namesake, and it's a Pueblo ancestral ruins that has been there for a very long time. There's a lot of stories that have been shared with me over the years about, about where it came from, how it used to be, and so I thought that was really important to share with you. And the next thing that I want to quickly jump over to is the Wash, Kilichi Wash, where the first school was located, and it was built adjacent to the first chapter house in my community. I called this time in my thesis the day school era, and that's only because, and that was like, early 1900s through the mid 1930s. And when the first school and first chapter house came into my community, there was the road that was built. And this road is right here, this yellow road. So you saw a lot of road construction and bridge construction that was happening in my community. And I, what I found in my archives, because that's what a lot of my historical evidence came from, is that before the first school was built in the wash or the canyon, it was also being considered at the Cross Canyon Trading Post, which makes sense because, early schools that were built on Navajo Nation, they needed to have easy access to water, existing roads and electricity. And so the trading post was a perfect place for that, but it never came to fruition for whatever reason. And so they ended up building into the wash. And so the second era in which I really started to examine like my the school site is when the second school was built, and that one is located in this area. And this happened around the mid 1930s, and which is also then where the third school eventually, like, I guess, well, it's where the school stayed up until the 1980s. But between the 1930s and the 1980s, there was a lot of development that had happened. For example, there was the transmission power lines that came into Kilichi, which goes all the way across Navajo Nation. And if I had time to share with you, I would tell you that there are plenty of stories that I have growing up in sheep camp in the summer, spending time with my Nolly, which is my paternal grandma, but that's for another time. And it was in this second era too that we saw a lot of other sort of development happening, like with the first chapter house moving up to what is now the second chapter house in the 1960s. And then afterwards, there was the build out of just a further expansion of the campus, which became a boarding school, which I labeled as which became a function of it at the time. And because there was so much investment happening for the boarding school, it became very important for them to consider building a sewage lagoon. And this was funded by IHS in the 60s as well. And that was important because before running water and electricity, for example, the students, when they needed to get rid of their urine or their feces, they had to dump it into the wash right here. And that caused a public health concern and a public health issue. And so to remedy that, they decided that they could build a sewage lagoon here. And that sewage lagoon then supported the ability for the school campus to expand their teacher housing and everything like that. And so that's important to mention because the sewage lagoon then made way for the first set of, or what I call the first generation of NHA HUD housing to come into my community of Kinlichi. And this was constructed in the 1980s. Had it not been for the sewage lagoon, it would not have serviced the chapter house or the first generation, second generation, which is here, or the third generation of HUD housing that has occurred. And so because of this, clustering of all of these development that has been happening, it's now become the center of my community in Kinlichi. And because we're continuing to grow, there was more need to expand, like the sewage lagoons that you see right here, for example. And the last thing I'll leave you with before my time runs out is that if it were not for the school here that is located in Kinlichi, it would not have provided the paving of this road that happened in the early 1990s that took you from the boarding school down to the housing to the chapter house, making our way across this landscape to finally connect us to Highway 264. And one of the justifications for that was because it needed to provide safe transportation of the students to and from school. And so the chapter house had the ability, in partnership with the school, to leverage for that building to happen. And the story where it all began with my nephew and his experience was at this school, which, what was the reason why the boarding school shut down below in the canyon and then reopened up in the early 1990s. And it shut down because of asbestos that they found in the building. But as you see here, there's similar sort of things that are happening with the present day school. You have your sewage lagoon, and you have your teacher buildings and what have you. But the thing that I think about now is what type of cluster development might begin to happen because the school moved here. Why the school moved from here away from the center of our community to 2 miles away from the center of my community, it's unclear, but it's likely because there was no available land, because no family around the area was willing to, give over their grazing rights. But I wish that my community would have thought through building the present day school closer to our central community, because it's going to provide a disconnect. And right now, this road that you see right here is currently unpaved. And so I don't know when this road might get paved again, but that's just what I wanted to quickly share with you in the time that I had. And I hope you got to learn a little bit more about the power of mapping and your ability to, and our ability, my ability to convey how development has occurred over time using Google Mapping. So thank you so much and enjoy the rest of your day. Take care, be safe.